In this video, we're going to focus on congruence. Our objective is we will find corresponding parts and identify congruent triangles. The first thing we need to talk about are congruent polygons. They have the same size and the same shape. So they're exactly the same, but they're probably facing in different directions. So in this picture, triangle ABC is congruent to triangle EFD. Remember, this little symbol right here means congruent. So it says to write the congruency statements, use the above statement. So that means what things are congruent to each other. So according to the statement, and if we look at the picture, A is congruent to E because they're both first. Angle A, angle E. Also, B is congruent to F because they're both second. And then finally, C is congruent to D because they're both third. And we can see that they both probably look like right angles. We can write all three of those statements just like I wrote the first one. We can also talk about the sides being congruent. So if we look first of all, AB, first two letters, that would mean it is congruent to EF, the other first two letters. We can also look at BC and FD, and AC and ED. All of this we get simply from this congruency statement. We don't even need the picture technically. And for the sides, we would write the statements like this. AB congruent to EF. So let's take a look at this next congruency statement. We have triangle XYZ is congruent to QTV. We have a picture that tells us some information as well. So let's name the corresponding angles. Angle X congruent to angle Q. They are both first. Angle Y congruent to angle T. They are both second. Angle Z congruent to angle V. They are both third. The corresponding segments. XY is congruent to QT. They're first and second. YZ is congruent to TV. They're both second and third. XZ is congruent to QV. They're both first and third. So now we have all of our statements. So now let's think about what these symbols mean. This symbol means congruent. So we already know we can look at our statement above. Angle Z is congruent to angle V. But the congruent symbol is very different than the equal symbol. The equal symbol means we're looking for an actual number, and this letter M tells us the measurement of angle Q. So now we need to think about Q is congruent to X. And if we know X is 30 degrees, we can also know Q is equal to 30 degrees. Notice the difference when it says equals. We're actually looking for a number in that situation. The next thing we need to talk about are how to prove two triangles are congruent if we're not told that they are. So I want you to kind of think of this as if you are a lawyer and you have to give pieces of evidence in order to convict someone of a crime. So for instance, 3 ways to convict someone of a crime would be, 1, you could have video evidence. So let's call this one video evidence. You could also have audio evidence. And you could also have an eyewitness. So these would be the 3 ways that you could prove that someone did a crime. These 3 acronyms, angle, side, angle, and side, angle, side, and side, 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 are all ways that we can prove 2 triangles are congruent. If they have an angle, side, and an angle that are congruent, the whole triangle is. If they have a side angle and a side that are congruent, then the whole triangles are congruent. And the same thing with side, side, side. So let's take a look at a couple examples here. So for this triangle, it says, for each pair of triangles, list the corresponding parts. Write a congruency statement and a reason for the triangles. So if we take a look at these two triangles, we have BNW and BNR. What does it look like they would be congruent by? Well, so far we know that they have two sides, they have two angles, and they actually share this side in the middle. So it looks like it's going to be side, angle, side. So now that we know our reason, the way that we're going to convict the criminal of the murder, we need to fill in the three blanks. So a side, an angle, and a side. So let's start with the side that's already marked. WN is congruent to NR. Those are two sides that are congruent. The two angles, WNB, is congruent to BNR. And then our final piece of evidence would be that they share this middle side. So we would say BN is congruent to BN. It's congruent to itself. So now we can finally wrap up the case by saying triangle blank is congruent to triangle blank. So now let's name our triangles. So our first triangle, BWN, is congruent to. Now we need to make sure to list the second triangle with the corresponding angles in the correct order. So B corresponds with B. W is the same as R, and N is the same as N. So now we've written the statement correctly. And we can say that they are congruent by what we said at the beginning. Side, angle, side. Let's do another one just like that. We're going to list the corresponding parts and write a congruency statement. So on this one, you'll probably notice that all the sides are the same. So we're going to guess side, side, side is our way that we are going to convict the criminal. In other words, the way that we are going to prove the triangles are congruent. And let's fill in our three letters and come up with our three statements. So let's start with the 1 hash. BC is congruent to EF. Now let's go to our 2 hash marks. That means those two are the same. AC is congruent to DF. And then finally our 3 hash marks. AB is congruent to DE. Now we just need to write the triangle statement. Triangle blank is congruent to triangle blank. So let's start with ABC is congruent to triangle. What does A correspond to? Corresponds to D. What does B correspond to? Corresponds to E. What does C correspond to? It corresponds to F. And again, we can reiterate what we said at the beginning. Those triangles are congruent by side, side, side. When you do these problems in class, you're going to have this exact format. This is going to be your entire answer. We're going to look at one more example so that we get all 3 ways of proving a triangle. So this triangle is a little bit trickier. We know that we have an angle, we know that we have a side, but we need one more thing to be congruent. So the way we can find if one more thing is congruent is look right here. Those 2 angles are vertical. They're across from each other. So we know for sure that they are congruent. So now we have an angle, side, and an angle. And we can set up our 3 reasons in order to prove that the 2 triangles are congruent. So our first angle, we can call it angle C because there's only one angle that's by C. We can call our second angle here D. If there were more angles that had a vertex of C or D, we'd have to use 3 letters, but we don't have to here. Now let's do the 2 sides. BC is congruent to DB. And then the angle, we do have to use 3 letters here because B is a vertex for 2 angles. EBD is congruent to angle ABC. Now we've given our 3 reasons, we need to state our 2 triangles. So let's start with triangle ABC again. A would correspond to E. Oh, we should write the triangle symbol though. A corresponds to E, B corresponds to B, and C corresponds to D. Triangle ABC is congruent to triangle EBD by angle, side, angle. Thanks for watching. Watch it again if you need to. Rewind, and I'll see you in class.